As the spectre of cancel culture looms large over politics, the arts, learning institutions, and virtually every other aspect of our lives, finding a way to protect freedom of expression becomes ever more important. A book out this month entitled The Cancelling of the American Mind: How Cancel Culture Undermines Trust, Destroys Institutions, and Threatens Us All outlines the scale of the problem, but it also lays clear steps that we can take to try and eradicate the issue. The authors are Greg Lukianoff, a lawyer and president of the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression, and Rikki Schlott, a journalist, political commentator, and co-host of the Lost Debate podcast. Thank you both for joining me tonight. Greg, I'm going to come to you first. Cancel culture. A lot of people say It doesn't exist. What do you say to those people?
I'd say I'm not even sure they believe themselves when they say that. I've been working on campuses for 22 years, and cancel culture, our definition of cancel culture is the uptick in campaigns to get people fired, deplatformed, expelled, to lose their jobs since 2014 due to their opinion, due to their political opinion, due to jokes, due to their expression, and the climate of fear that resulted from that. And it was really obvious even in 2015. But by 2017, 2020, the numbers we started seeing of professors getting targeted and losing their jobs is on an unprecedented scale. I always give the example of during the Red Scare in the United States, during McCarthyism. At the time, they were aware of about 63 professors losing their jobs for being communists, about 90 for losing their opinion overall. That's generally rounded up to about 100. It's probably a little more than that as the decades will reveal. But now we're talking about 200 professors fired. We're talking about, and back then, by the way, the law wasn't even clear that you couldn't fire professors for being communists. Now it really, really is. And we're dealing on something on a historic scale. So people who say that cancel culture isn't even real, you just shouldn't take them serious anymore.
Rikki, can I ask you about that specifically in higher education? Why is it the case that it has particularly impacted universities?
I mean, one thing that I can say as someone who was just on the campus 2 years ago at NYU is that the culture of conformity is really just spiraling and self-perpetuating in a way that I think is really concerning, particularly with young people who I find are just they want to fit in. I mean, frankly, when I went to NYU as a freshman, I was hiding Jordan Peterson books and Thomas Sowell books under my bed because, God forbid, somebody knew my politics. And I think in a world like that, it's really easy to just bite your tongue and assume that everyone else disagrees with you. But it's really a tyranny of the minority, and that's something that I saw firsthand. And so that's part of my motivation in co-authoring this book with Greg is I think that it's time to fight back and actually speak up and be authentic with our values. Because as soon as I spoke up at NYU, then everyone around me, I found out, actually quietly thought the same thing, but would come to me and say, hey, I agree with you entirely, but just don't tell anyone that we had this conversation.
It really is a fantastic book, but more than that, I think it's very, very important. Greg, do you think, though, that you can solve this problem when so many people are, frankly, a little terrified of uttering what they believe is going to be the unfashionable view?
Well, we spend about a third of the book talking about solutions, but one thing I want to be really clear on, this is not easily solved. Like we've seen on campus, particularly with students coming out and saying that, Israel had it coming and Hamas was right. And by the way, if you fire those people, that's cancel culture too. We're very clear about that. We take on both the right and the left. But it also revealed a single-mindedness, a lack of viewpoint diversity on campus that is very true. And it's made all the worse by the fact that people think that they're going to lose their careers if they mildly disagree. I mean, mild disagreement these days, as you know full well, Andrew, like particularly on elite campuses, is treated more like blasphemy or heresy. So we spend about a third of the book, and we go all the way from parenting to corporations to K through 12 reform to higher ed reform, and we think that some of these changes have to be big and sustained. And unfortunately, we think it's probably going to get worse in 2024 before it gets better.
Well, that is bleak. Rikki, can I ask you, there's one part of the book where you touch on the idea of comedy, of course, and the arts more generally, and that, of course, is something that I feel particularly sensitive about, because I'm shocked, frankly, that some of the people in society who are meant to be the most free-thinking of individuals, the artists, the creatives, the jesters, that those are the ones that are falling into line with cancel culture. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Absolutely. Throughout the book, we have different case studies of different industries, and most of them are knowledge producing institutions, but we did also include comedy for a very important reason. And we believe that comedy provides a space where we can actually acknowledge some of the more touchy and sensitive topics in our culture and laugh about them and confront them in a non-threatening way. And unfortunately, we've seen that completely degrade, particularly on campuses as well, but also just out and about. I mean, I think the Dave Chappelle controversy at Netflix is a perfect example of how campus sensitivity is really launched out into the real world, into corporate culture as well. But I would say that the comedy chapter was one where I had a unique amount of hope at the end after writing it. I think seeing Andrew Scholes land on his feet recently was pretty heartening. Seeing Netflix actually stand behind Dave Chappelle and change their entire corporate policy to basically say, like, we are going to say something that you don't agree with as a company, and if that's a problem for you, this isn't the right company for you, actually makes me think that comedy is one of the first industries that there is at least a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel, in my opinion.
Well, I certainly hope you're right. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but the book is called The Cancelling of the American Mind. It is absolutely fantastic. Greg and Rikki, thank you so much for joining me.